Hey, what's going on? This is the Saturday Down South podcast. I am Connor O'Gara. Will the playoff semifinal? It is set, and don't you know it? Georgia missed out for the second consecutive year. Wow.
Yeah, look at that. Wow. Herb
Yeah.
Street vindicated.
The playoff field definitely did not play out in the way that I anticipated when we were discussing this in the preseason, when we were discussing this in early December. To imagine Notre Dame advancing in such convincing fashion. We will get to all the takeaways from that game, but I think there are certainly a lot of people in college football going, wow, Notre Dame finally did something like that for the first time in decades. We will not just talk about that game. Of course, that's going to be a big topic of discussion, what it means for Georgia moving forward, a lot of different pieces to that. But we're going to recap every SEC bowl game that we haven't recapped, including, by the way, maybe the game of the year with Texas and Arizona State, a game that you were at.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have so much to get to. Bama takeaways. I mean, South Carolina, Lane Kiffin driving me freaking nuts. So let's get into it. Let's start with what we saw last night. We're recording this, by the way, Friday. Hopefully people are listening to this by maybe the time they're driving home from work on Friday. We moved our schedule as a result of this game, obviously being moved with the tragedy that took place in New Orleans on Bourbon Street. And obviously our hearts go out to everybody that was impacted by that. So weird circumstances it's been. And I know from people that were there, just a very kind of bizarre type of situation that you just don't expect when you go into an event like this, and to have it play out this way. It set the stage in a very strange way. And to be playing this game at 4:00 on Thursday instead of originally late on Wednesday, it was very, very strange and very, very bizarre. So I wanted to mention that before we get into the actual game itself.
Yeah, man. I mean, that day was just a fever dream. I woke up super excited to go to the Beach Bowl, and I look at my phone, and there's like this, terrible tragedy unfolding, and it feels like every hour there's some new crazy detail, to the point where, I gotta get into the Peach Bowl. I'm able to like access one of like the club areas to get some photos, and I'm sitting there like looking, just scrolling my phone, and I feel like I'm in like suspended reality. Like I'm looking at my phone. It's almost like everything. The best way I could describe it is like one of the movie scenes where there's like explosions going around, and I'm like looking at my phone, and I just keep learning. And Texas is like smoking Arizona State in the background. I'm like, man, like I'm sad. Like this game's a blowout. Like what do I do? And then I'm like, as the day goes on, like this game turns around and watches Skattebo like do what he's doing, and it's like just this insane. Like we're hearing about the bowl game, getting moved. We're hearing Louisiana politicians say it's getting played same day. That was one of the most fever dream, and I couldn't even imagine. Like our guy Perry was at the game. Me, I'm like at the Peach Bowl trying to not like, because you know how it goes when you do what we do. Like you want to be grateful for where you're at, but at the same time, like I couldn't focus. I'm like trying to check on my guys, Perry, all that. So yeah, I mean, I there's really just nothing good to say about it. I'm hurting for the city of New Orleans, and I hope everybody can get in contact with their people. And just one thing really quick, you know how it goes in New Orleans as far as people have a good time. It was on Bourbon Street, and I couldn't imagine how scary that was for a lot of people that, their family member had fun on Bourbon Street and was sleeping, and, their phone died or something like that. I've had that happen to me where I'm worried about one of my buddies and their phone's just dead on Bourbon Street. So just a weird day in college football. One of the most tragic events related to college, probably one of the most tragic events. I'll just say that.
Yeah, we don't have to quantify. We don't have to
exactly.
Yeah.
And then
it's one of those things that you just like. It was very, very bizarre. So I don't mean to just like make the entire conversation about that, because obviously people have had 2 days to kind of process the magnitude of everything that went into it. Like I didn't even realize that all of this had gone down until like Perry texted me. I had on Wednesday I woke up and I was going to be doing dad duty stuff until game started and whatnot, and that's kind of usually like how we do things on a Saturday. And so like Perry texted me at like 11 a.m. on Wednesday morning. It was like, hey, we're good, just in case you were wondering. I'm like, oh yeah, like I knew he was staying at the Notre Dame team hotel. He like does that, and he was telling me about that. I was like, oh good, you didn't get in any fights with the opposing fan base. That's a realistic thought that we think about with these games. It's like, no, I mean the terror attack. And I was like, oh, I need to get on the internet, don't I?
Yeah, dude, I had that conversation with so many people because it just came out of nowhere. So I just wanted to address that. Like, we're looking back at it, it's like, but the way that day developed was so scary, and my heart goes out to everyone. And Yeah, let's talk some football. You know, it's a football pod. I just had to talk about that because my heart was hurting and still hurting for those people in New Orleans.
Yeah, it's just very very unfortunate, extremely unfortunate set of circumstances. Once the actual game got started, I think even if you could kind of put the weirdness aside, I don't think any Georgia fan would have walked into that building and expected to get beat the way that it did. And I don't mean that this was some complete beatdown. I mean, Notre Dame ends up with 244 total yards. Like, where I'm not going to sit there and pretend like Notre Dame dominated every facet possible of this game. But, I mean, they didn't even average 4 yards per pass attempts. They did average more yards on rushing attempts than they did on passing attempts. But,
well, that's what felt excruciating is it almost felt winnable the entire time because Notre Dame was kind of struggling as they built this huge lead.
Yeah, it was weird from that standpoint. But at the same time, I don't think anybody in red and black ever expected to be facing a 3-score deficit in the second half.
Oh, yeah.
No chance. There's no way that Georgia expected to have blindside pressure, overwhelm Gunnar Stockton, who was good at times, but not the guy that you wanted, obviously, in that spot in his first career start. There's certainly no way that Mike Bobo, with 39 seconds left in the 6-3 game, seemingly going to be down 3 points going into halftime, thought that anything but positive things could happen if you attempted a pass play. We're going to get to the Bobo part of this later. There's absolutely no way that Georgia thought in the biggest defensive moment of that, probably of the night, it turned out to be that its captain, the Butkus Award winner, Jalen Walker, who was mostly dominant throughout the night, there's no way that Georgia would have thought that he would be the one to commit the cardinal sin of jumping off sides on a play that Notre Dame had just no business snapping the football deep in its own territory up 13. And to be fair, there's no way that Kirby Smart thought that you could sub out all 11 guys and actually do that because according to the SEC and ways that he was communicated to, that was not a legal play and not something that Notre Dame was allowed to do. Turns out
no way the referee could have seen that the receiver blatantly jumped off. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, just a lot of different things that just did not go Georgia's way. There's just no way that Georgia would have believed a 2-touchdown loss to Notre Dame was in the cards. And it was. And it didn't feel fluky. And I don't think there's any one thing to blame for it. Not even Parker Jones, the inactive walk-on who made contact with an official and then was shown by ESPN a million times with McElroy having the gall to say Steve Bartman. Not cool. No, we don't need to do that. I do wonder what the closed-door conversation with Parker Jones and Kirby Smart was, because I looked up his bio immediately after that.
Tried to mic him up, I'm sure. So I'm sure we can find that audio available.
Good Lord. If this were the XFL, Parker Jones would have been getting a sideline interview. What were you thinking, man?
They tried. Guys, they just randomly cut to him like midway through the third, and we're like, look at this guy. Remember him?
And again, obviously, it's a catastrophic mistake to make in that standpoint. You can't connect with an official. We saw that happen in the Texas game as well, right, with a sideline penalty of an assistant who just trucked the lines judge, and you just you can't have that in that moment. I totally get it, but oh my gosh, they were just hammering that point home when Georgia ends up settling for a field goal. And that doesn't, in my opinion, end up being the difference in a game. Maybe the complexion of the first half is different, but nonetheless, I don't think that's the only thing that stands out for Georgia. I come back to this. Georgia was a flawed team in a field of flawed teams, or at least teams that have had moments in which they have shown their flaws in significant ways this season. And it was easy to default to Kirby Smart, a.k.a. the guy who was 35-1 against non-SEC teams since the start of the 2017 season. The stat you heard me bring up multiple times. Now he's 35-2 in those spots.
I'm sorry. I have this box score open at ESPN. They have a Zapruder film highlight of this player on the sideline. I don't even want to say his name again. Sorry.
Parker Jones, he's had better moments in his life, I'm sure. And that tongue lashing from Kirby, picture whatever you got from your parents when you did the worst possible thing as a kid, and just multiply it by 100, because Kirby probably shaved years off of his life with the verbal beatdown that he gave to Parker Jones.
Sorry, I didn't want to bring him up again. I just started laughing. I was like, I want you to think I'm laughing at you. ESPN is once again. Anyway, back to what you were saying. Kirby's record in these games:
35-2 in these spots. And Notre Dame is now 4-23 against AP top 5 teams since 1999. By the way, Marcus Freeman has 2 of those victories. He does. He outcoached Kirby Smart. And the offsides play, that was kind of the crescendo of that. But, and you can probably make a lot of fun of Notre Dame in years past for its regular season schedule, even though I kind of defended it at different points. But you can make fun of it because of how much they have struggled in these settings in the postseason. And this is when I close my eyes and think about Notre Dame in the postseason, I think about Jamarcus Russell and that LSU team just throwing it all over them in that building. And that's or Notre Dame, looking like it just doesn't belong on the same field as Ohio State in the Fiesta Bowl. Like those are the images that I think of when I think of Notre Dame big time stage postseason.
Yeah.
This was not that. And it could have been because Northern Illinois, as we know, in case you hadn't heard, lost to Northern Illinois as a 28-point favorite. They've been the same team for the 4 months since then. Since that game, 5 matchups against AP top 25 teams at the time that the games were played. 4 of those were double-digit wins. They won those games by an average of 3 touchdowns. Now compare that to Georgia, Will. All year. Who's Georgia? Who's
Great
Georgia?
question. And we still don't know.
Still don't know. I guess the only thing that you knew from Georgia was that they weren't going to do anything offensively in the first half. 6 of their 12 games against Core 4 competition, they trailed at halftime. Here's the most telling Georgia stat with that. In the unfortunate consistency in those areas with struggling to get into the end zone in the first half of these games. The last time that Georgia led a Core 4 team at halftime was against Texas. The first Texas matchup, October 19th. All right? Think about that. They were tied with Tennessee, but we're talking Core 4.
And that was all defense too.
Yeah. All defense.
It's like their offense was like putting it on them and like moving up and down the field. Yeah.
This was the preseason number 1 team in America who had the preseason Heisman Trophy favorite at quarterback for 13 of those 14 games. By the way,
that feels like a fever dream. I'm glad that you said that because that really puts it in. I mean, the favorite for the Heisman is how we started the year.
Yeah, I mean, it's depending on like if you looked in July versus August, like it was him, it's Quinn Ewers, and there were a lot of reasons to believe that Georgia was going to end up being the least flawed team in college football. And I made that argument throughout the offseason. Like, guys, I don't see the flaws with this team. And this entire season was just this is why they're flawed here. This is why they're flawed there. 19 of the last 20 seasons now, that the preseason AP number 1 has failed to win a national championship. Second consecutive season that Georgia was on the wrong end of that. Georgia now owns 3 of those 19 seasons of a preseason AP number 1 coming up short of a national championship. What's very clear, and the only real takeaway that you can have from, I think, watching the way that this year played out is that Kirby just never found the right buttons to push with this team. I don't think you can blame injuries. I don't think you can blame NIL. And I honestly don't think it's valid to be like, well, the discipline issues in the offseason and, guys getting driving-related arrests and stuff like that. I don't think that you can just say that is what led us to what happened on Thursday night. I think Georgia just never had that gear. A lot of things. I will say this though:
I don't know if the guys that they brought, if Nick Saban coached these guys at his peak. I don't think this is a title team.
It depends on who you're talking about here, because I think if you're talking on the offensive side of the ball, then that's a different discussion, and Saban's not going to be your guy that's going to be like, oh, I'm going to develop a receiver. Obviously, he had no shortage of great receivers. He also had great offensive minds and great schemes.
I'm just saying, like one-to-one, like game day decisions. You know what I'm saying? Like I don't. We talk about the coaching, talk about recruiting with the receivers. Like there's obviously a dearth of weapons on the Georgia sideline. I don't think that's anything. I mean, that drop was just
the Dylan Bell drop was terrible. Now they end up scoring a touchdown on that exact drive, though. So it's in a weird, and they scored like 3 plays later or something like that with Cash Jones. But yeah, I mean, the drops this year obviously like really, really cost this team. There's no doubt about it. They had more consistent QB play like that would have helped. Better run game discipline on defense, and they were, I thought, okay at times in this game. More urgency on offense. Like you could point to all these things and go, yeah, this held this team back. This unbelievably talented team that was in a different place with percentage of returning production than most Georgia teams are. And it was supposed to be the revenge tour from last year of getting left out of the playoff, of losing the one game that they couldn't lose. And they're going to show the world. And they didn't.
Yeah, I just keep going back to it though, man. I mean, I think what that required, which was a logical thought, right, was Carson Beck being Heisman Trophy level guy, All American. Because I look up and down this roster, it's like, who was going to make these plays? Like, Etienne was never going to be that guy that gets 20 carries a game. We talked about this. They never really found that guy. They had to piece that guy together Frankenstein style. So, okay, Carson Beck can't be Joe Burrow, basically. There's no Edwards-Helaire. There's no other guy to lean on. Okay, who is the receiver? Who is the pass catcher? Because we've seen Oscar Delp, pretty solid player, not Brock Bowers. Not going to carry it. I mean, it's so rare for a tight end to carry an offense the way that, at times we've seen Bowers do. And so I look up and down this roster, and I don't feel actually that disappointed, as weird as it sounds, because I'm like, who could have played better? Dylan Bell for sure, right? But I mean, Gunnar Stockton as a passer, I think, played just as well as Riley Leonard. Obviously, Riley Leonard had some really big rushing plays, and that puts him over the top, overall. But I don't think that as far as the decisions on game day are what lost Georgia this game. You give up a return touchdown, you give up the bad turnover. To me, that's not coaching. I just don't think they had the horses. And when you're playing a team like Notre Dame, who Brian Kelly left there because he couldn't get talent, not great. I don't want to. It's Kirby Smart's quote unquote fault because he brought the guys, he hired the coaches, it's his team. But I don't think there was anything that could have happened on that game day, assuming that they get the return touchdown and that stuff happened. That I don't think Kirby could have saved this.
That's kind of the problem, though.
Yeah.
Where's the development? Where was the development? More so on the offensive side of the ball. I think there are a lot of guys you could point to on the defensive side of the ball and say, yeah, I would still want that guy. I would still want Jalen Walker being able to rush up the edge.
The Georgia defense, I have no qualms for the Georgia defense.
The adjustment, there's an obvious one on my mind. I've been biting my tongue on this. And I waited until Georgia scored just 10 first-half touchdowns in 12 games against Core 4 teams this year. Kirby Smart needs to cut Mike Bobo loose and realize that his offense is a problem. It's a problem.
Well.
I did a 180 on Bobo last year because he proved my initial skepticism wrong. All right? There were a handful of pivotal games last year in which a shorthanded Georgia offense that was working through the Brock Bowers injury, that was working through the Ladd McConkey injury, where I thought they came out and they looked the part, and I loved the way that Carson Beck developed over the course of last year. I thought you could point to his performance as an OC and say, did he take the Monken concepts that we were promised that he would? Last year, I saw it, and it was there. So I apologize to Bobo. I apologize after the Tennessee game, I believe. That's when that came. But now I'm sitting here today, January 3rd, another season in which Georgia will not play for a national championship. And I'm saying that if Kirby cannot see reality, he is letting his loyalty to his best friend limit his football team. We have reached that point. What about this offense got better?
Nothing got better. I struggle to see what stayed the same.
The first half stuff is significant because you could tell me, yes, they made adjustments at halftime. They figured things out. They got better. But here's how it hurt you, okay? Georgia's opening drive, 3 negative plays, 1 first down from a DPI, and a punt after Gunnar Stockton fumbled out of bounds. He gets the backside pressure, and that was actually a fumble. It was not an incomplete pass. That was with 3 weeks to prepare. After 2 consecutive games in which you failed to have an offensive touchdown in the first half. And I can blame Bobo for the lack of reps that Gunnar Stockton had because he didn't attempt a pass against Core 4 competition this year because Georgia couldn't get out to early leads. And Stockton's inexperience showed at times. And I'm not blaming Gunnar Stockton, who I think
he played awesome, man. We're saying the same thing, to be clear. 0% Gunnar Stockton's fault because that dude ball. I look at the box score. I'm like, wow, he actually had way more attempts than I remember. Again, he had turnovers. I get it, but what was he supposed to do? Dylan Bell's out there playing soccer.
Dylan Bell got 12 targets in this game. Yeah, and I like Dylan Bell too. And And by the way, his depth of target, you'll go back and look and you'll be like, what in the world are we doing here? And that's, I mean, kind of an issue, obviously, because you don't have the time. And when you assume that you're going to have the time, like Bobo did with 39 seconds left in the first half of that game on Georgia's own 20-yard line in a 6-3 game with a guy in his first career start and a left tackle that's getting beat off the edge, he decides, let's dial up a pass play because nothing bad can happen. But he did it. That's the single biggest sequence of the game right there, okay? And everybody knows it. And the fact that Notre Dame returns the second half kickoff just magnified how crucial of a mistake it was, because you also know in that spot when it's 6-3 that you're kicking to them to start the second half. So you can think like, we'll find a way to be able to get a field goal here to close out the half, kind of ignoring the fact that one of the worst possible things happened to you at the end of that first half against Texas, which is Carson Beck gets hurt, injures his elbow, season-ending injury, because you're like, we got to just, screw it. Now is when we're going to throw downfield. If I'm Kirby, I'm not just looking at the one-game sample size. I'm looking at this entire season and realizing I need to look inward and make a change. This would be as coveted of an assistant opening as any in the sport. And instead of paying your best friend 1.1 or 1.2 million, whatever the salary is going to bump up to, the last year of this deal, he signed a 3-year contract, go out and hire someone who can maximize talent. Because I would have an extremely similar list to the Oklahoma vacancy, and they ended up going with John Mateer. I'd look into Kirby more. I'd look into Mike Shanahan in Indiana. I'd look into Charlie Weiss Jr. at Ole Miss. I'd look into guys that call plays, because right now you have an OC that, yes, he's loyal. And yes, he ran, in theory, the system that you wanted him to run. But when it's 23-10 and they're out there running wide receiver screens with 2 minutes left of a football game, your offensive coordinator doesn't get it. And if you think he gets it, then you don't get it. And that's reality. And Kirby Smart, I'm not one to sit here and criticize his decisions. I've been very reluctant to do that in years past. But if he doesn't make his change at OC, he's going to regret it. And he won't realize it maybe until years and years from now.
Man, I spoke on this beginning of the season, the Alabama game. And I literally said this offense is going to cost this team a national title. And the vitriol that came after me, I don't really want to see that again. Let me tell you this. Georgia fans, I've said this from the beginning. I like you guys a lot. I live in Atlanta, Georgia. If you think that I wanted to see Notre Dame win the Sugar Bowl against Georgia, I got a bridge I can tell you. So before I get too deep into this, I know, the criticism of me is talking about LSU, but I'm talking about two specific people that are very relatable here. Number one is Bo Pelini.
Boy.
This Mike Bobo hire?
Oh, no, it's not that bad. Will, it will never okay. I'll stand up for Bobo in this sense.
Okay, listen to me. Let's say they kept Dave Aranda and the defense was a top 5 defense, which is what it was all year. This offense cost Georgia a national title because he hired his buddy. And at the end of the day, you can't do that. We talked about adapt or die. We talked about this over and over again where, okay, Todd Monken was this NFL guy. I'm not going to exactly say he was like disgraced, but he was an out-of-the-box hire.
He was an outside-of-the-box hire, and he was kind of screwed by Freddie Kitchens with the play-calling duties. And Kirby made an unbelievably savvy move to say this guy is going to be the one to ramp up our offense. And it was an outside-of-the-box hire that, like, it wasn't, oh, hey, you know what, this guy is, I've worked with him in the past. He's my former teammate, my former roommate, and this stuff. Obviously, very, very different set of circumstances.
I agree that Kirby Smart should trust himself. He already won back-to-back titles. He already competed for a third one in a row. How did he do that? He had an innovative offensive coordinator. He had a gritty quarterback who was humble and a great leader. Okay, go back to that, dog. You don't go back to 2008. Go back to what worked for you. We could see it in this offseason that for the first time, a little bit of the 2010 Bama vibe, this Georgia team started to look complacent for the first time under Kirby. I'm talking about the offseason. I'm not talking about during the season, where they started to kind of smell their own farts a little bit, and that's never been the Kirby Smart thing. And on defense, it rarely showed. Right? Like at Mississippi State, when it mattered, and I said this over and over again, I said I'm not going to doubt Georgia because their defense keeps showing up, and it did. I'm going to talk about another guy here. Cortez Hankton, sitting on the LSU sidelines, just produced two receivers that are in the rookie of the year conversation, along with Jaden Daniels. He's a quarterback not coached by Hankton. But point being, I look up and down this roster and I genuinely say, okay, your leading receiver is Arian Smith, who had one catch. Smith, Cass Jones, Dom Lovett, Dylan Bill. ETN absolved the blame a little bit, but he's up out of here. Two Delps, Nate Frick. Who on this roster was going to go be George Pickens? I hate to say his name, but
I wouldn't even go that far. You know how I feel about the Pickens thing, and he's the rare 5-star that ended up going to Georgia, and whether or not his abilities were maximized in that offense, I would debate that as well. And I think Pickens is a lot to blame for it, the injury being a big part of it as well that he suffered in his pre-draft season. But you're saying you look at this roster and you go, why are they not getting the guys in there when their receiver room looks different than what it thought it was going to be? The Colby Young, Ra Thomas,
right?
That whole thing off the field certainly played a part in the picture of this. But where are the guys, the 5-star guys coming through, where you're just like, that's a can't miss talent, and when that guy has a matchup that we like, he can take over a game. That guy's not there. You're right.
That's Brock Bowers. That's him. Where's your lad McConkey? Where's your reliable guy? They don't even really have that. Again, it was kind of supposed to be Oscar Delp, but in terms of him being a tight end, like that was just what the offense kind of looked like. But then we went, oh wait, maybe this offense just had Brock Bowers. Maybe if Brock Bowers played left tackle, they would have just run that way every play. Like maybe they just built it around that player. And so point being, it's not just getting the talent. It's not just developing the talent. Like I think that we're treating the symptoms like we're putting a Band-Aid on smallpox or something. If we're going out, it's play calling, it's whatever. This team needs to aggressively hit the transfer portal. And
that's what they've been doing at the receiver spots, though. And it did not work out. Like,
you know what?
This group didn't.
You're so right. I'm so glad you said that because they already tried that. It's not just the Bobo thing. Like, I had to do so much research into this Bobo thing because it felt like every week some Georgia fan was giving me some stat or revelation. I appreciated that because I learned a lot. It's the fact that even if you go hit the portal, there's not a dude in the building that can develop that guy. And we're getting to a point where they can't recruit that guy either because why would he come here? Georgia is a great defensive team. They model their head coach, okay? And I'll say this too. People are going to make a big deal out of the off-the-field stuff, the distractions. Look, the reason why George Pickens is such a great case is he had those issues. He's still having issues on the field and off the field. He's one of the rare on-the-field issue players. And yet, it was worth it because he is a great talent. And when you excuse great talents making mistakes, it often works out for you. There are not players on this team that deserve that level of grace from their head coach that they've been getting. I think that at the end of the day, the way that we've seen these players carry themselves, not a generation that was led by Stetson Bennett, not a generation that won championships at this point. There are very few people on this team that were on those teams that were contributors and leaders. This team has a completely new culture and DNA, and it needs to come from within. I understand that. Like I'm on the clean house page because it's the receiver room, it's the offensive coordinator, it's all that, it's the quarterback. There's not a part of this offense, maybe the line you could look at, but again, lots of talent there, hard to pick that up. So that's all I got to say about that is that, look, the defense is always going to be good. I want to keep going back to that. I don't think Georgia's fundamentally broken. I think they're going to be fine. I'm fascinated to see how Kirby Smart is going to figure this out. I think he's reached Nick Saban territory where I got my popcorn and I think it's going to be all good. But I think it's look in the mirror time. Let's not hire our buddies. Let's go find some random dude from the XFL or something and let's try it out. Because
find your guy. Yeah.
We don't have the talent to overcome bad coaching, and we don't have the coaching to overcome the talent. It's a two-headed problem.
So moving forward, and this we'll close with this because I know we got a lot of other stuff to get to. But Carson Beck's off to the NFL. That we know. I'm going to make a bold prediction and say that he's picked after Stetson Bennett, who was 128.
He announced that so quickly too.
Yeah, we'll have more time to discuss that. But for Georgia, that means the closest thing to a quarterback battle since 2020. And that was the weird Jamie Newman.
That was a quarterback free-for-all. That was a game of Fortnite. Yeah. They were all fighting each other.
Yeah, JT Daniels, Jamie Newman, Dwan Mathis. Yeah. And then Stetson Bennett ultimately emerges. And then, but knowing Kirby, I would imagine he's going to build around Gunnar Stockton as kind of the leader in that room. quarterback battle will be
That's the good news.
him.
You got something there, I think.
Yeah, it's still a really small sample size, and that's the frustrating thing. And like you have Rashada, you have Puglisi, and they're clearly still after a veteran quarterback that they would like to add to that room. They were in the market for our guy from Cal, Fernando Mendoza, who ends up going to IU. He probably saw like, hey, why would I want to go, in this battle when I could go play at Indiana immediately? There was some initial talk about Jackson Arnold. He ends up picking Auburn. Charlotte quarterback Deshaun Purdy, he was a possibility. He ends up picking Florida to be able to back up Lagway. The crazy thing is that Brock Vandegrift, who just retired from football, would kind of be a nice fit now that he's got the reps for what they need. And
he's going to do the Uncle Rico. He's got the mustache. He's come back. You guys need an arm?
Yeah. I mean, but like, I think if you're retiring from football before even kind of really testing those waters, then
there's something going on. Like, I shouldn't make a joke about that because that's a really personal decision, and I hope that works out for him.
Like, he would have actually been, though, the really nice, as Philip Dukes would put it, the boomerang transfer, who would have just made a lot of sense in that scenario. But now, as a result, you have a lot of questions. Also, just give Zachariah Branch the blank check. Give his brother a semi-blank check as well.
Got too many Delps, not enough branches. We need to get some talent here, folks.
They need some talent. They need some talent because they did not hit on the portal guys at receiver that they were hoping for. So yeah, we're gonna have a lot of time to be able to discuss Georgia this offseason. Those are just some initial thoughts after just a results that, again, Georgia would not have expected if you had told them that was how it was going to play out.
And Georgia fans, feel free to hit me up on Twitter. I just want to say, let the apologies be as loud. You know the rest.
I did. Okay, so one last thing. I did one bad thing, and I usually don't do this. But when it was 20-3, I went back and I found the people who were pushing back on my tweet from the first round game, wherein Notre Dame really looked the part, I thought, against Indiana. And I said, I think this is going to be an incredibly difficult matchup for Georgia. And I went back and I liked all those tweets of people that are just like, I don't know what you're watching. Like, what are you talking about? You clearly don't know football. That's a rare time. And I'm not doing a victory lap because I predicted Georgia to win this game. So like I predicted Georgia to win this game. I predicted Georgia to win a national championship. That prediction is wrong. I was wrong. So, but at the same time, maybe Georgia fans just don't do that in that moment.
I love the bunker mentality. We're an SEC podcast. Of course we want you to do well. Anyway.
I get paid either way, I'll be honest. All right. Peach Bowl.
Yeah, it's out. Anyway.
Peach Bowl, you were there.
Yeah.
You were at the game of the year, in my opinion. That is not a dad joke where I say that just because it was the first game of 2025. No. Real game of the year.
Wow, I haven't seen football like this since last year.
Yeah. That game was edge of your seat thrilling. Starting right around like the 7-minute mark of the fourth quarter when Arizona State was down 16, as you mentioned earlier, it kind of felt like, this is just kind of a ho-hum Texas win. Arizona State's going to spend all this time in Texas territory and not be able to do anything with it. And just when it looks like Texas delivered the dagger on that Ewers touchdown run, which came as they were talking about Arch Manning on the broadcast. It was almost like Ewers heard that. He's like, watch me turn it upfield. Watch me show you that my ankle's fine.
How do you like me now?
Seriously, big time Toby Keith moment. It felt like at the time for Ewers, felt like the dagger. And then it becomes an instant classic. Just an unbelievable, wild finish that felt totally unpredictable. Texas looks like it's about to choke this game away as Cam Skattebo is about to pull off the best boot and rally in college football history ever. I mean, the Skattebo trademark pending.
I feel like they gave him the MVP. I'm going to give it to him. That was Dillingham is such a sicko, dude.
Unreal. And I went from saying, wow, Texas did a really nice job making sure that Cam Skattebo wasn't the story of this game, to thinking, I think Cam Skattebo might be in statue territory at Arizona State. And just that pose, either do the puke and gaze pose, or when he completed the long pass on the trick play, and what was that, on fourth down? Where
4th and 2, yeah.
That's when you realize, things are happening. Things are absolutely happening. I will say, I don't think that ended up being the most unbelievable play of the game. Texas, when it was facing 4th and 13 in overtime, dead in the water, I'm thinking, I'm about to go into my office and I'm about to basically write the column that I think Texas fans and non-Texas fans would agree would be a fair one to write, which is, did Sark's faith in Quinn Ewers just cost Texas a shot at the national title? Even going back to the deep shot earlier to Bond that was picked off on a ball that, again, like Ewers just, that deep ball was just kind of fluttering up there, and it just, Arizona State converges. Was there a targeting penalty on that play that should have been called? I don't know, debatable. But I'm thinking, finally, Texas is cooked, and it's going to have nobody to blame for itself. There's no way they're going to pick up this 4th and 13. Will, was it fair to say that place was rocking at an unbelievable decibel level?
Man, crowd-wise, I'm really, respect, tip of the cap to Arizona State. They're like technically the largest university, like I think in the world, at least
huge
in America. Like, yeah. And part of that's they have like an online school that they acquired, whatever, huge school regardless. And so, point being, their crowd really showed up, and it was really nice to see. It wasn't like a packed house, like in terms of like 100% capacity, but it was like, let's call it like high 80s, low 90s. And watching the crowd swing back and forth, like the Arizona State crowd felt like it was about to explode, like the entire game. And then watching the momentum swing back and forth, where it was kind of like the Simpsons, like ha 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 ha, like really cool sight to see.
That's kind of one of the underrated things about games like this is that you get the feeling, at different points it feels like a home game for a certain team, and you don't really hear the boos, and you don't really hear this, oh my gosh, the visiting team scored and it's silent and all you can hear is the bench erupting or something like that. That's kind of a fun, underrated thing that people don't like to talk about with these neutral site games. But just to set the stage, for those of you who forgot, at that point on 4th and 13, Arizona State had already scored a touchdown. So Texas obviously needs to match in overtime. But again, you only need the 13 yards on that play. It would have been 8 yards if not for the 4th Texas pre-snap penalty in 4th quarter and overtime alone. Golly. Arizona State sends a ton of heat. Texas picks it up, and Ewers hits our guy Matthew Golden on a double move.
6-12 on game day.
Dude, just balled out of his mind. It's the biggest Texas touchdown, in my opinion, since Vince Young got the edge against USC. I think you could make a real case for that. Just an unreal moment. Ewers immediately points to the sideline. Presumably it's Sark. And, it was almost like he was saying, I'm glad that you're in my ear. But as Chase Daniel pointed out, it was a great breakdown. If you saw the breakdown that Chase Daniel and Emmanuel Acho did, I would recommend watching it. Maybe not if you're an Arizona State fan. But go back and watch that play, because Ewers checks at the line, and he calls for max protection because he recognizes that the blitz is coming. And basically, you could do the hypotheticals and go, well, if he doesn't do that, he's swallowed whole by the 2 blitzing linebackers and the safety coming up the gut. Because we had seen a lot of instances post-ankle injury in which Ewers had kind of succumbed to that. The Golden route is nasty. He gets the safety to bite. The middle third safety is late being able to get back. And if Ewers underthrows it, though, it's tipped by the converging safety in the middle third. If Ewers overthrows it to the back of the end zone and leads him too far, Ewers will be thinking about that throw and missing that throw and not giving his guy a chance well past the point when he can think about growing a mullet. Okay? That's safe to say. Instead, it's a throw that ends up traveling about 40 yards, and it's perfect. It is the perfect play. And it's the exact reason that idiots like me who love hypotheticals and, we love to say, oh, this coach should have done this. We love to just play the results with stuff. It's the exact reason that these guys are put in a spot for a reason. And for everyone saying, because I know the pushback, everyone's saying, well, Arch would never have had Texas flirting with disaster. Do we know with certainty that he would have had that rapport with one of his go-to receivers the way that Ewers did with Golden? Because I know everybody's talking right now about Jeremiah Smith's rapport with Will Howard, as they should be. It's phenomenal. We're going to get to that with the Texas breakdown and how they're going to be able to potentially slow him down if that's even possible. But those two guys have it going. The comeback routes that they were using to be able to set up those potential game-winning kicks as well. The play that he hits him on in overtime as well, in double overtime for the 2-point conversion. those guys are in sync, and it shows. And it's why you love to have a quarterback as experienced as yours is, even with some of his flaws sometimes, because, man, the timeliness was just at a different level. And the other throw, we almost missed coming back from break. I don't know if
I heard about that. Yeah.
It was so weird. So we're coming back from break after the first overtime, and before they can even show the score bug at the bottom of the screen, yours is stepping up into the pocket, throwing off of his other foot, and it's peanut butter in the back of the pantry, Gunnar Helm.
It's always
breaking
there,
free. Like the quickest double overtime touchdown ever. And that play was a thing of beauty. That play was Sark, by the way. That play is all Sark. If you go back and watch that with the pulling guard, Helm allows, like, the pulling guard, they basically sell run with what they were doing, and it kind of sucked the linebackers in, and then Helm sneaks through on the wheel route, and just exactly where you want him to be for that double OT touchdown. Just an unbelievable sequence by Texas, and I'm blown away that they had that still in the bag, because I thought they were dead in the water.
I'm going to go back really quick because, okay.
Yeah, I went through a lot. Go back to whatever you need. Sorry about that.
No, it was all, but we lived it. Like it was all in a row. So, okay, you said the Texas play was the best. Now, would it change your mind if I told you Skattebo did the exact same thing? He went on Dan Patrick yesterday. Apparently, he went to the huddle on that 4th and 2, and Levitt was like, "Hey, man, I rolled my ankle." So the play call was a Philly special. He was supposed to throw it to Levitt. He also checked at the line.
Wait, so you're saying Levitt checked to the line to have a
Skattebo checked. It's a Philly special. Skattebo was supposed to throw it back to Levitt. Levitt goes, "Hey, my ankle's rolled. I can't catch this." And he goes, "Oh." So he checks the receiver into like a post route. And basically there's one route being run. And he's like, boom, he saw it was 101. And as a quarterback, Skattebo checked to that. That, again, maybe he's telling his own legend. I don't think he's a guy who does that. Everyone he's like Chuck Norris at this point. Everyone kind of does it for him. But once I heard that, I was like, yeah, I think that the only way that, if Arch Manning would have gotten Texas out of this, maybe he had a 12 gauge. I think that was the only way that Skattebo was going to not come back the way he did, because I'm like, yeah, this guy had like some dark magic within him that day, or, not that it's dark. He's a good dude. Like he had the juice. And I think this comeback started with the safety, weird play, doing math in person like that. Not great for me. But the way that Arizona State came back, we talked about it in kind of the preview of Dillingham, Sark, best couple of offensive minds in football. It was a really defensive game. It was feeling weird, and it kind of felt like Texas was simultaneously about a score away from just riding off into the sunset, and you don't want to keep giving Arizona State chances. But I'll fast forward all the way back to the point where you were right there. Just the 3 plays in a row, kind of like to end this game, where it goes, okay, 4th and 13, Gunnar Helm touchdown, pick. That was like, there are moments where college football feels like art. That 4th and 13 sky cam shot looks like a Renaissance painting. Golden separating by himself, his hand is like outstretched like the Sistine Chapel. You see, and like I actually saw that in real time. I was sitting with the Arizona State media and kind of like on the end there, and they were like, I saw him come open, and I was like, oh man, that's him. And the way the ball just slowly floated through the air, it was reminiscent of that. Remember the Milton play I always talk about against Florida, where I could hear Inya playing in the background as he was getting hit by Watson? It was like one of those, but it was the good version where the ball was just traveling so slowly. And you could see the faces on the Arizona State TVs going, oh my gosh, he's behind us. And then boom, it just snaps back into real time. And it's like, oh, they might be in trouble here.
By the way, Will had a great video on Will was running SDS Social on Wednesday as all this was going down, and Will had a great video of this to see that shot and to see the development. It was basically like you were watching the All 22 from your vantage point from the video, and you could see that moment where you're right, like if it's even, he's leaving. Like that was that moment, and seeing that take place and seeing how much that clearly, like, for Arizona State to rally back from that would have been unbelievably tough. They did have the first down play in OT where I think it was a check down to Skattebo, in double OT, I should say, where it was a check down to Skattebo, and he picks up the initial first down. And then that's when I think Levitt had the play where he tried to attack Mukuba, who makes the big time play. 2 transfers making those monstrous plays for Texas with that roster and all the talent that they had coming back. I think that's kind of an underrated thing to think about with Golden and Mukuba. We just talked about how Georgia felt like it whiffed in the portal, and Notre Dame feels like a team that benefited greatly from their, not the quantity, but the quality of their portal additions. And for Texas to have those guys show up in that moment was just unbelievably important. Sorry, I just totally derailed your thought.
No. I mean, it's just loose bewilderment. I think we're both in the same place of like, I mean, the way that this game ended, and you could talk about the Oklahoma Georgia game, way more of a back and forth game, but a comeback like that, the way it played out, the way that Texas obviously wasn't playing well down the stretch, but I wouldn't exactly see them rolling over. I mean, they missed 2 kind of bunny field goals by Auburn. I talked about this in the preview. Might get rough for Texas pretty quick here because they don't have a lot of answers for this stuff. We'll talk about that later. I don't want to mar this moment by that, but those little things where it's like, once you guys get back on the horse and you should be able to put this team away again, 2 of these, and it felt like we were in a Disney movie. Like, it just felt like, wait a minute, the coach has a 4th timeout he pulled out of this puck.
We got to talk about the non-targeting call on Michael Taff.
Sure. So before we get into that, you know me, my relationship with the officiating. I just want to say this really quick. Let's just set the table here. There were 3 weird calls in this game. You talked about one of them on the Quinn Ewers pick, which, bless his heart, that guy has to throw one 2020 Drew Brees duck a game.
I know what you're getting to, yeah.
And he throws this in the 4th quarter, not the 1st quarter. Buddy, get out of your system. Throws it in the 4th quarter. There is, in my opinion, my humble opinion, more evidence of targeting a quote-unquote non-football play where you are launching yourself at someone on that. Okay, so that doesn't get flagged. That's fine. It's a playoff game. I'm cool with that. Okay, another play. We, America, spent an entire year bemoaning the tush push, saying the tush push.
I know where you're going, Will.
Saying the tush push was bad, and the Philly fans are going, oh, stop it, da-da-da. No one, not a single human being says, hey, an offensive lineman can RKO you into the end zone. When they repealed the Bush push rule, nobody, not Reggie Bush, not Matt Leinart, not anyone said, oh, you know what this means, actually? This means that we could just throw the guy into the end zone.
You're not allowed to pull. You're not allowed to pull. You could push him into the end zone. You weren't supposed that touchdown that Cam Skattebo had, as unbelievable as his day was, and as much as he needed to be pulled, not even pushed, but pulled into the end zone, that play also should not have counted. I've seen that flag before. You are not allowed to be able to pull them in there. So,
in terms of egregiousness, I mean, he picked him up like the vet is now picking up my cat. He picked
Same
him
size
up.
too. Yeah.
The offensive lineman picked up Skattebo and was like, hey, buddy, and placed him in the end zone. So if we want to talk about blatant disregard for the rules, that's blatant disregard for the rules. Now let's go to this targeting call that everyone's mad online about.
Okay. If you somehow didn't see this or forgot, and the fact that it's 2 days ago, the final minute when this happens, and it looks like Michael Taft, the Texas safety, he makes helmet-to-helmet contact with the Arizona State receiver on a tipped pass. I thought live it was targeting. I thought on replay it was targeting, and then it wasn't targeting, which is the targeting rule in a nutshell, if you were being honest. Arizona State punted instead of getting a 15-yard penalty that would have taken them to the Texas 37 in the final minute. Worth remembering, just so we have the full context here before we get into whether or not it was targeting. ASU was 4 of 11 on kicks 30 yards or more entering the day. There is no guarantee that Arizona State, as great as it was down the stretch, automatically wins just if it gets that call. So let's not pretend that that was 100% a deal breaker, especially when you're in obvious passing situations with Sam Levitt and his 4.8 yards per pass attempt. Okay. But even if the intent wasn't there and it was late in the game and you didn't want to see a playoff game decided on a targeting penalty, which that would have had a huge determining factor in that result. I thought by the letter of the law, it was contact to the head or neck area against the defenseless player, and it should have been called. And Arizona State fans, I understand why you're upset with that.
Mm-hmm.
They should also still be upset with the 2 critical errors in coverage that cost them the game, in my opinion. But I was in agreement more so with Arizona State fans in that moment of, if that's not targeting, then what is? And maybe the tip pass, because like the tip pass thing gets brought up with pass interference and stuff like that as well, that it can't be DPI if it occurs after the ball's been tipped. And maybe that was factored in. I hate the fact that we didn't get any explanation on this. How lame is that? How stupid is that? That you can have all of this talk and you just make a controversial ruling that is going to impact so many lives, and we don't have any sort of explanation from the officials. Instead, we're left to interpret what the targeting rule is. Everybody's doing screenshots of what this says about targeting. Oh, this angle that I saw people doing screenshots of the contact right before the play, and I'm like, that doesn't do us any good. And it doesn't have to be like this. Why do we do this? I know Josh Pate has been really vocal about the lack of accountability for officiating, but he's right, because you needed an official to come out and say, this is why this played out the way that it did. Here's why we stand by this. Here's why this was a mistake in this spot. Whatever. Just give us something. Instead, we just have, nope, play on. I thought that was wrong.
Okay, yeah, I'm with you, and I think it was targeting. I'm not debating that. I'm gonna go back to the Boise State Penn State game, right? So in that game, Boise State had a touchdown wiped off the board by like a weird hands to the face penalty by their offensive lineman. And it was kind of like away from the play. It was very slight. It happened in an instant bang, bang play. And it would have cut the deficit to 1 score, changed the complexion of the game. You got to err on one side. Okay. And in my opinion, this is my opinion. I'm not saying we should legislate off of this. This is my opinion. So again, if we got a whole new group of people coming after me for this, but point being, I understand the mentality of let's let the kids play. Okay. I understand not calling or reviewing even the first targeting. And the reason why is with the Ewers pick, that was in the process of that pick happening. So you really start to get in some nebulous waters there, where if the targeting happens or just before the ball is secured, I believe it would just...
It's pass interference. It's called as pass interference, and then you review it for targeting. That's probably how it would have played out.
But you see what I'm saying? If it's called targeting before the ball is secured by the defense, it's just like a first down. There's no turnover. And so point being, I get holding your whistle there because, again, football, it doesn't... Really, the targeting on the pick didn't have anything to do with the game. Okay? Same deal here. Unfortunately, didn't have anything to do with the game. So if we want to get mad at not throwing targeting in a moment where it was just kind of like irrelevant to the outcome of the play, the pick happened in the first one, the stop was made in the second one. It wasn't like, oh, this guy was holding and it opened up a hole. It wasn't like something like that. I think that when you've already had a play like that, and like I said, of these three, the pickup is clearly the most egregious. That's the one I would like to see flagged every single time because it's just cheating. The other two, it's like, I could make you look like Barry Bonds in the batting cage in 8K video, dude. I mean, the way that we think that 8K video is reality is like the funniest thing to me as a video guy. And people are showing me 8K video frames. They're like, yeah, open up Avid for me if you want to talk about 8K video. All right. And so these guys will show me this. And I'm like, yeah, man, but that happened in 2:14. That happened in a split second. And when you do anything in football, it's like this looks like two titans colliding at that speed. So that's my only point is that it was a bang bang play. It was a football play. Both of the quote unquote targetings were. If we want to legislate stuff out of the game, let's legislate stuff that affects the game. So in that moment, like if you think your team deserved a first down because they got stopped and hit a little hard, owie.
Yeah, that's what you're saying. Yeah. What was very clear though. And maybe, I don't know how much this impacted the way that it played out if you're watching from a neutral perspective. But Peter Burns said he turned into the Russian crowd at the end of Rocky IV, where they start cheering for Rocky instead of Drago. Did it feel any way like that? Like, it would have been so funny to see Cam Skattebo becoming so inspiring to that crowd at Mercedes-Benz that Texas fans in the crowd are throwing horns down. It's like, man, we just love this ASU team.
Lots of hand signals going on in this crowd.
Right? Cam Skattebo was a legend, though. Got to say. I mean, I do want a DNA test from the Hester family just to make sure that he's not another one of his kids, and we just didn't know about it. I've asked him about this. Like, you sure? Like, you 100% that this isn't you? Because
respect to my guy Hester, one of my first favorite football players. This guy's built a little different than Hester.
Yeah, he knows.
He was dropped into the chemical X.
Yeah, fair. I wasn't gonna let post Heisman results dictate how I felt about my ballot, but Man, I didn't feel bad one bit about putting that guy third. I won't push back on his claim that he's the best running back in America, even if I stand by putting Genty second. I won't, argue against people that put Genty third or
Mm-hmm.
put him first. Performance for the ages.
Mm-hmm.
Unbelievable performance. Doing that against the number one defense in terms of defensive efficiency was unreal. 284 total yards, 142 rushing, 99 receiving, and 42 passing. A total of 39 scrimmage touches. Just a warrior. I don't know what his body feels like right now, 48 hours after.
I do. Horrible.
I don't even know the degrees of horrible, though. It's almost like, how when you do a workout that is new and after the fact that you're going to be sore in areas that you haven't been sore in maybe ever in your life. I can't even sit here and picture what it feels like to be exposed to the type of punishment that he was over the course of a day against a very physical Texas defense that, look, it still took gang tackling and it still took everything that Texas had to be able to bring that guy down and to somewhat contain him for the first 3 quarters. But my God, I have so much respect for him, and Texas should feel fortunate to survive a performance like that. And it survived because ASU spent all that time in Texas territory and just couldn't get those breakthrough scores early that they needed. And part of that is just who Texas has been and how comfortable they feel even up backs against their own goal line. But it just it needed to be able to come up clutch down the stretch with that play against Leavitt, and it did. And just I tip my cap to Texas for being able to survive that and finding a way. It's all about surviving advance. Texas has not had style points this year. They didn't get any style points for that performance. They're not going to have anybody talking about their style points going into the Ohio State game. And everybody's going to be talking about how much style Ohio State has, deservedly so. But just can't count out Texas. You just can't at this point.
Yeah. We need Quinn Ewers to just throw the ball straight up in the air the first play of that game.
Just get it out of
your
system.
Yep. Because I was like, one of these is coming the whole game. And of course, anyway. So, yeah, I'll say this. This game really, and everyone's trying to be so negative in college football and be like the next Howard Stern, I guess. Like, we need to appreciate what this sport is. And this game just legitimized Arizona State to me in a way. And Skattebo, to your point, like, this was I know it wasn't just him. In the preview, I said it would be ridiculous to me for him to do an average rushing performance by him, 200-something yards, 3 touchdowns. This gentleman is throwing up, and screaming at his offensive lineman and doing all this. And Billingham's like, wait, we probably shouldn't, feed him carries at this point. Like, we probably shouldn't give him 20 more. Okay, we're going to give him a pass attempt. Okay, we're going to get him a receiving. And, I mean, Texas dude just rips his helmet off on that play. I'm not even going to talk about stuff we need to legislate. That was rough with a guy that was concussed. I'll call it like I see it. But point being, the way that they were able to get him involved and not be like, hey, man, run your head into a wall from this point. It felt like he was neutralized by the laws of physics, i.e. human body shouldn't be able to take that much contact. And the way that they were able to, like I said, find ways. So credit to that offensive game plan. Credit to Sark for kind of waking up. And I hate to say it like that because they played really well to start the game. When you have a kick return touchdown, it's weird in context to the Georgia game where Notre Dame gets the kick return touchdown, and it's kind of the difference that's keeping Georgia from knocking on the door the whole game. And this game, Texas gets one early, and it's like it just got erased, So it's all narrative based, right? But like I said, I think this really legitimized Arizona State in my mind. I have a lot of respect for them. They have a massive university, massive fan base. They get their NIL collective together. I don't think they're going to be competing for titles or anything, but the Big 12, that could be theirs for the taking.
I'm glad the 12-team playoff gave us this.
Yep.
It was the game that we were kind of hoping to be able to get, is a team that had multiple losses, that wouldn't have been in with the 4-team playoff, that gets in and gives us just an unbelievable afternoon of football. That's kind of all you can really hope for in these scenarios, and you can't necessarily be disappointed with all these blowouts because that's just kind of the way the sport works sometimes. But when we get them like this, yeah, we got to appreciate them. That game was unbelievably fun. I hope Texas and Ohio State's going to be unbelievably fun. I hope. In Jerry World, by the way, should be a very pro-Texas crowd, but
a crowd that's used to getting disappointed in that building.
Very true. Very true. That is, it has not been kind to teams from the state of Texas. Look, We'll talk more about that matchup. We're going to preview it next week on Monday. We'll have a lot more thoughts. We'll get into the Jahdae Barron, Jeremiah Smith matchup. Texas hopefully learning from Tennessee's mistakes with single coverage on Jeremiah Smith. Quinn Ewers' revenge game. We'll talk about Will Howard trying to overcome his 0-3 record against Texas, which is interesting. He did. I went back and looked this up real quick. He is so old. How old is he? That dude lost to Sam Ehlinger in 2020. Will Howard is old.
That is incredible.
Lost to Casey Thompson in 2021 too.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah.
Wow, what a guy! I can honestly be happy for him. Anyway, continue.
Yeah, but yeah, we'll get to all that. We'll talk about the Texas angle of that with next week with the preview pod. All right, ReliaQuest Bowl. The bowl, formerly known as the Outback Bowl. Bama fans, don't earmuff it. Don't hit fast forward through this. You need to hear this too.
Your offense got taken out back.
And you said I was going to come up with the dad jokes, Will.
Flogged out back.
Golly. What an embarrassing showing by a team that everyone was waiting to have an embarrassing showing. I wasn't going to watch this game against a 7-5 Michigan team and let it impact how I felt about Bama's playoff chances because it was a 7-5 Michigan team that basically had all their best players opt out. I watched Bama go 9-3 with 2 losses to 6-6 teams, the last of which being a blowout against Oklahoma. You know this. You already know all this. So I personally did not watch this game a month after, all of this had been settled and have this be like, oh, hey, if you beat Michigan, that's going to tell me that your resume was good enough to make the playoff. Bama's offense looked like a group that could just show up and just rely on that logo to beat Michigan. And Buddy did it not. With 5 minutes left in the second quarter, Bama had 2 more yards than me, you, Lauren, and Claire. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But did have some horrendous turnovers that Michigan kind of sort of took advantage of. And then Bama only being down 6 at the half was kind of baffling. Like, they should be down 25.
The most mesmerizing thing about this Bama team is when their athletes do get in space, and we saw that during that comeback, they have just really, it's not Georgia. They have the athletes on Bama, and you see it like when they can actually get the guys the ball, because it felt like they were going to win this game at the end.
Yeah, and thought they were going to be able to kind of find a way and claw back, and thought they were going to get some good field position and be able to have that kind of go-ahead touchdown, and just didn't have it. Mm-hmm. Didn't score a single second-half touchdown, and it was a very bad Jalen Milroe game. We're going to get to the Milroe discussion in a second here. The most maddening thing about the Bama hypothetical that people had in the first round was that they were still assuming, for whatever reason, that Bama had this unbelievable floor, and this team didn't. And that was the point.
Right.
You know, like...
Did you watch the Oklahoma game?
Yeah, like, this game wasn't an outlier. You know, in past years, it would be an outlier. It was more of a reminder than anything else. It was a reminder that Bama was an incredibly unpredictable team, and you didn't know which team was going to show up in a given week. And this season, it's not just that Bama lost 4 games for the first time since year 1 of the Saban era, 2007. You lost 3 times as a 14-point favorite. At least 14 points, by the way. Didn't really strengthen Greg Burns' argument that Bama needs to take a serious look at scheduling.
Look, say what you will, but Lane Kiffin was at least vindicated over this last couple of weeks. He comes out as one of the only winners.
I strongly disagree with that, and we're going to get to that in a little bit.
No, but I'm
here.
saying between Alabama and all their posturing, South Carolina, all their posturing, at least Ole Miss showed up to the bowl game.
Yeah, I guess from that standpoint, sure, but everything else, no.
Yeah.
For what it's worth, Bama's defense fought its tail off in this one, and even when Jahad Campbell goes down, I thought that group did everything that Kane Wommack could have asked for. They fire their co-DC after this game. I don't think that's a result of this game. I think maybe that's just more so the result of kind of the up and down nature of this season, but I actually felt bad for Bama's defense in this one because they just had all these short fields when it was monsooning earlier and Bama's offense couldn't hold on to the football. Mm-hmm. And that happened because even when the weather settled down, Jalen Milroe just wasn't seeing it. When you couple that with a bad offensive line showing, which Bama had with its tackle spots, it's a bad combination. We've seen that. We've seen that time and time again this year. Jeremy Bernard and Ryan Williams both looked like they were going to lose their minds. And Bernard especially, he's like throwing his hands up like, man, I got 5 yards of separation, middle of the field. What are we doing? What are you not seeing here? And that's frustrating because scheme is there and separation is there. I just thought body language was really telling, especially from Bernard. Williams had only a couple of those moments, at least from what I saw. But Jalen Milroe just did not develop under Kalen DeBoer in the way that I thought he would. I thought Jalen Milroe was going to win the Heisman Trophy this year. I thought it was going to be rough to start. I thought he was going to turn into a Heisman winner. I really did. And I don't think it's an issue with Milroe with how hard he works. I don't think work ethic is a question whatsoever. I thought he came back after the Michigan loss last year with something to prove. I think everything indicated that.
Man, I really like Jalen Milroe. I don't know. It's not that I have, I saw him in person like one time. Technically, I saw him at the LSU game. I saw him, one person. I saw him one time in person. It's not like I had this great relationship or reason to like him, point being. But I feel like a lot of the vitriol has been like placed on him, and a lot of the comments I've heard from people online are kind of just troubling because this is a guy, and I talked about it ad nauseum, and I know that nobody wants to hear this right now, especially Bama fans, but Bill O'Brien thought this guy was a safety. He was behind Bryce Young. He had an offensive coordinator who's our age in Reese.
Reese did the best job with him too.
Yeah, he did, but I think all that stuff was out of script. I think that whenever you look at the highlight reel from that year, Milroe was kind of doing it by himself, and I think that's what it was. It was this year he started to have the two wolves, the angel and the devil going, do I follow the script or do I not? Last year he didn't. He didn't care what Tommy Rees had to say in big moments. This year it was like, well, DeBoer is this offensive mind. You should listen to him. He regressed. I'm not taking the blame off of him. He's getting to grown man territory. He's close to my age. I get it. But at the same time, to act like Jalen Milroe is the reason why this Bama team is bad is so disingenuous to the person, the player, the worker that you just talked about, guy who's came back, led the team, kept this roster together.
It's a good point.
These guys that are online talking about Jalen Milroe and calling him all these names, if he hit the portal, do you know what would have happened to this offense? You think Ryan Williams would still be here? Okay, so I just want to say that, I'm a guy who has defended few and far between Bama players. Again, we've all been in this conference around Bama for 20 years, all right? Milroe was one of my favorite Bama players of all time because of how he carries himself as a man, as a leader, all that stuff. And when he has a bad game, I get that we all want to blame everybody and be mad, but look at what this guy's been through. And this is the only player that I think Alabama has failed, to be honest with you.
He announced that he's off to the NFL. Interesting timing. I would love to know what those conversations were like because I think Bama acknowledges all the points that you brought up. And I think there would have been a respect factor for him if he was open to the idea of returning. I don't know that that was the case. I don't know that he went to the Bama coaching staff and said, look, I'm kind of debating what I'm going to do. If I stayed, what would my NIL value be to stay here? I don't know if this was a situation where Bama then went back to him and said, we're not going to be rolling out the red carpet to make that happen. We're going to respectfully, we feel like we're going to move on. We're going to go in a different direction. I don't know that Bama did that. We can speculate all that we want until we actually find out real legitimate intel on that. I don't want to assume that I know how those conversations went. It wouldn't surprise me if Bama was a little bit reluctant to basically bend over backwards to keep Milroe. And if that played any part in his decision to go to the NFL, it would not surprise me.
Mutual parting of ways, as they say.
Kind of. It could have been. It could have been because it didn't work. It didn't work. And look, he had moments. He definitely had moments. And I've been much more of a Milroe defender than not, okay? The last 2 years, really. Since he proved me wrong and beat out Ty Simpson for that starting job, I have been one of those guys who has tried to give him the respect, especially when he was a better player down the stretch in 2023. I think if you are trying to evaluate what he's going to be at the NFL level, that's an entirely different conversation than who he's been at the college level, but it shouldn't be thrown out. He's going to be extremely polarizing for a lot of people. I think it's insane if he's in these first round discussions. Absolutely insane. Negligent. If NFL people tell me that he's worthy of that and you just have to default to the skill set, I'll roll my eyes and tell you, all right, yeah, I know nothing. I haven't watched this guy at all. I don't know anything what I'm talking about for the last 2 years.
I mean, I get it. I like it more than Anthony Richardson for sure. If that guy could go as high as he went, then I'd rather have Milroe than him. But let's not do that again.
Yeah, like so, and we'll see what this conversation ultimately leads to with him, because he's not going to be in the same pedigree as Anthony Richardson with him. By pretty much by the time draft day rolled around, it's like, yeah, he's going to be a top 5 pick.
Yeah. But if Richardson had Milroe's like work ethic and leadership and all that, I think he'd be fine. That's the thing, is that the intangible stuff is, physically he's really gifted. He's obviously a great athlete. As far as the work ethic and the way he carries himself, he's great. That other stuff is kind of what being a quarterback is about.
Yeah. It's interesting because there's a little bit, I think Milroe and Will Levis have a lot in common too. Like that's a guy that people, and I don't think he's going to get the opportunity to have the pre-draft conversation that Levis did, where it was seen as a really drastic fall that he didn't go in the first round. I don't think it's going to end up being like that for Jalen Milroe. I'll be very surprised if it is, but look, I think he'd be a guy that if you're telling me I got to take him in the first 3 rounds, I'd be like, I can't get there. But would I be intrigued to have him as a backup, to have him in the locker room, to have him learn under a veteran quarterback, to see if there are things that he could just be able to study and see, then yeah, I'd be on board with that. Because there have just been too many bad moments from him this year to make me think that's all of a sudden going to be different after working with one of the best offensive minds in the sport in Kalen DeBoer. It's not like he was still working with Bill O'Brien. It's not like he was still working with Tommy Rees this season. I would just be terrified to take that guy anything earlier than the middle rounds. And I say that as somebody that really has grown to respect who he is and find myself defending him more times than not. But I'm just not quite there with him being this elite prospect in the way that some probably still think he is.
I was being so nice and respectful, I managed not to laugh until you described him as Will Levis written in cursive, and now I just can't.
I didn't say that. I
I'm
didn't
just
say
kidding.
cursive.
I'm just kidding. It's like script A. I'm just kidding. But yeah, yeah. I get it. I think Milroe has had some great moments. I think that you can credit him. Similar in a way to a little bit of the Quinn Ewers conversation that we had a couple of pods ago, where it's like his performance this year shouldn't determine his legacy at Alabama. He got you to the SEC championship game. He won the SEC championship game last year. But I'm talking about the road specifically. You know what I'm saying? Like those individual wins that he had. LSU, Auburn, the things that he did last year. You shouldn't just look at his final year and be like, "Oh, this guy's a bum." So that's it on Milroe.
Georgia twice. I mean, like that's a very hard
Texas
thing to
how
do.
hard that is. So point being, like, I think that there's a lot to say about this Bama team. A lot to laugh about. I think the coach, they fired some co-defensive analyst.
I brought that up earlier.
Yeah, neither of us really know what he does. I'm sure that fixed it. I'm sure that's going to fix the offense. But to your point, again, Saban struggled in year one. I know. Let's get some of their guys in. But that being said, this was, I think, pretty roundly a very disappointing year for a Bama team that the whole story was the leadership was coming back. Malachi Moore, him, we're going to bring in. I mean,
Tyler
Ryan
Booker,
Williams. Ryan Williams is 3 times the player I think anyone thought. We talked about Cam Coleman in the preseason, and this guy is already as great as Cam Coleman is. I'm not going to go into all that stuff, but there are lots to like about this Bama team. Like I said, they still have a really talented roster. I think you're about an off season away where it's kind of teetering to where, okay, you get the right guy in, you're right close to where you were before. If you don't, it starts to get a little bit more complicated.
Here's one of the issues I have, though. And again, it's year one. We don't touch year one coaches on this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
I do think Bama has some real questions moving forward with DeBoer, and not hot seat questions. I'm not going to be the guy that's going to put him on the hot seat going into year 2. Others will. Brandon Walker will probably tell you that if he loses one game next year, he's going to get fired. But the questions that we should be asking about DeBoer, are you developing? Are you developing in the way that you were heralded for doing so at Washington? Because I don't think Bama's going to have a first rounder in this draft. At Washington, he didn't have a player drafted at all after year 1, and it was different because you could sell it as, look at all these guys coming back. So the guys coming back, Bama's not going to have a bevy of first-team All-SEC guys entering next season. Now, we'll see if that plays out by season's end. Obviously, that's more important than preseason all-conference teams. Who's going to be preseason All-SEC outside of Ryan Williams? That's an issue, okay? And I can't say that this cupboard was totally bare just because of the 30-day window, wherein obviously they still lost Caleb Downs. You lose Isaiah Bond, Trey Amos to Ole Miss. Like, you lost significant guys. It was still the number one team in the country in terms of talent composite.
Mm-hmm.
You still had, what, 16 5-stars on that roster? So, like,
And your
the
issue
development
was,
issues.
remember, the O-line, snap of the football, you bring in Brailsford. Like, it felt like at least a solid team that wasn't going to embarrass you coming into the year.
Yeah. So, like, it's somewhere in between. Look, it was exposed to the 30-day window, but it was still a team that you had pieces to be able to try and develop. And I don't know that they trended in the right direction. And some of the bowl game results dictate how we feel about that. I get it. But I just don't feel as strongly about DeBoer going into year 2 compared to where I thought I would be at this point when he got the job.
Yeah, this is about what I expected. You know me, man. I mean, this is exactly. I mean, it's the fact that you're following the legend. I said that the guy who follows the legend always struggles. I think that DeBoer was put in a pretty ultimately unwinnable situation. That he made decisions that he made worse. Right. I think that losing Ryan Grubb, who Seattle fans aren't in love with right now, was a really big deal. Talked about that at the time. Not going to get into the Kane Womack thing. Kane Womack's not why they lost this game. So not worth talking about Kane Womack right now. That'll be for another day. But I think that he did a little bit of the hiring of his buddies thing. I think that because the resounding chorus was you don't understand the SEC, he almost kind of doubled down and it was like, I'm going to get a couple of guys, get the guy from Buffalo or whatever, the DB's coach, but I'm not going to cave to the pressure of the outside noise. And I get as a football coach why people do that, to be clear. And if it worked out, it would have been a genius move. It would have been, Nick Saban, he's not listening to Paul Feinbaum and whoever all the lists say he needs to hire. But that being said, he needs to get on Bleacher Report and read the lists because that method did not work out. So point being, I'm not going to take
get on SaturdayDownSouth.com and read the lists.
You're so right.
We come up with better lists than. Sorry, not trying to.
That's the joke. No. That's me taking shots at them. That's the buzzy names of like, is John Gruden available? Like, that's what I'm talking about, not the stuff that you guys do. So, I guess that's we outright. So, point being, in the portal era, it can be done. That's where I'm going with that.
Yeah, I agree.
It can be done.
I agree.
So, there's no excuse for this performance if you're Alabama. Okay, you need to do better than this. You have the A. You know what it is. We all know what it is. There's no reason to even talk about it. You guys know the rules or the rules of the game. You wrote the book, okay? Yeah. So is Alabama going to be the standard bearer for the SEC going forward? This game was a big inflection point. I think that a smart coach that adapts, like Nick Saban, when Nick Saban got punched in the mouth like this for a season, everybody was on, like he wasn't answering Miss Terry's calls for a couple days. He was, maybe that's not true, but you know what I'm saying? He was mad. He was hot. He was, munching Little Debbie's. He was in the lab. So I'll say that I think that this offseason is going to be the biggest. Even bigger than last year for Alabama, to be honest.
Very important. Would expect them to spend very big in the portal as well. Post-spring, they'll definitely make some moves there. Citrus Bowl will. Shane Beamer versus Brett Bielema would have been an epic fight. It would have been great. It was the meme come to life. It really was. The pointing and the cat. I don't know what show that originated from.
Oh, yeah, it's some reality show. I don't think anyone actually saw the show. They just saw the meme.
Real Housewives, something like that. I don't know. Confusing how this happened, and if you didn't see this live, it's kind of confusing to explain it, but basically Bielema was trolling South Carolina with just unbelievably slow substitutions. Beamer kind of had enough of it after Bielema did the substitution gesture right at South Carolina during an injury stoppage. Haven't seen Beamer lose it like that before. Ever. Great camera work to catch Beamer after the TD that South Carolina scored in the next possession. You can read those lips. Bielema gets the last lap because Illinois gets the win. The real question we need to be asking, Burt or Beamer? Parameters matter in that fight.
Oh, dude, I'm so glad you brought this up. What do you think?
If it's UFC, it's Beamer. Because people don't realize how much Beamer gets after it in the weight room. A lot more than people realize. Bielema, obviously, very different physically, 7 years older, twice as heavy as Beamer.
7 years? That's actually crazy.
I know. That's kind of weird.
Carry that weight a little bit differently.
Yeah. If this is boxing or bare knuckle brawl, I'll probably go Bielema. But if this is anything goes, I'm not going to doubt the scrappiness of Beamer, even though Bielema, former Big Ten nose guard, albeit 30 years ago, probably has lost a step or two. Um, but I think there are a lot of scenarios in which Beamer comes away with a fight victory, depending on what you would allow him to do.
Yeah, I think that was the classic guys. I like Beamer more than 90% of people. I've said this over and over again. I think that college football should be fun. As someone drives what appears to be some type of a tank through my neighborhood. Anyway, I think college football should be fun. Point being, like, I like some of the antics he does. This is not the spot for it. I think I don't even really want to get into the call because I get like it's not worth dealing with the vitriol. But I think Bird had a point. I'm going to be honest with you. I really do. I really do. The thing about the T pose situation, the whole concept of Beamer's defense being, well, I check with the refs and it's cool. It's like, okay, man, that's not. Again, it's a unwritten rule. It's like, well, I asked a cop if I could go. Like, okay, man. And so I'm not even going to get into all that. But the fact that Beamer did his little like sneaky move, Brett said, "Hey, no," and Beamer kind of came away with it, looking to me like he backed down. I know in the moment he looked really chippy, but I think that the overarching view, when you lose the game the way he did, makes him look a little bit immature.
We play the results with that.
Yeah.
If he wins, it's look what he did to fire his team up.
Right.
Beamer was just fired up. I mean, he was very fired up for this one. Maybe the Nick Eamon-Worry deal with him opting out of the second half had Beamer with a little bit more edge. Weird situation with the star South Carolina defensive back. Must be something about playing food bowls in Orlando that makes star players go, nah, I'm good the rest of the day. I don't know.
Well, you're surrounded by food. You get kind of hungry. You're like, I'm out, boys.
Just like, I'm good. But the actual game was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
It was. And worth mentioning, this is going to sound like I'm just making excuses for South Carolina. I'm not. Illinois deserved to win that football game. South Carolina was not at full strength. Kyle Kennard, your Nagurski Award winner, opted out. Rocket Sanders opted out. Given his injury history at the position and the year that he had, kind of rebuilding himself as a running back, I don't necessarily push back on that decision at all. And then the Nick Eamon-Worry situation was just weird. Very, very weird. South Carolina still would have been fun to watch in the playoff at full strength. This game, even if they had lost it 35-0, wouldn't have changed that for me. But let's not do the thing where we pretend it was just a massive slap in the face to have this team not in the field. Let's just instead acknowledge that this was the best season of the post-Spurrier era, and it's something that South Carolina should be able to build on with a top 10 returning quarterback in the sport in Lenore Sellers, who had moments in this game, but not necessarily quite as crisp as he was down the stretch. And you've also got a top 10 defensive player coming back in the sport in Dylan Stewart. Those are good things. Those are things that South Carolina has not typically had that will make it a fun team to talk about. And if you're talking about how do you change the conversation about your program, South Carolina did that in spades this year. And it would have probably helped if they had won this game going away. And if Beamer gets some sort of flex on Bielema and his team ends up winning by 3 touchdowns after that sequence happens. It didn't happen that way. And he ultimately doesn't get the last laugh that he had been kind of hoping for. Not quite 2 years ago with the Notre Dame Bowl loss, but you felt like, oh man, this was an opportunity for them to really close with an emphatic statement. They fell short of doing that.
Yeah, I mean, no, and I agree with you on the play the results thing. I think at the end of the day, football is about winning and losing, right? I think at the end of the day, South Carolina had a great season, and I've said this at times, we are so pushed towards the playoff and compete. This was such a such a ceiling-raising season by South Carolina, and they should be so proud of this season. That being said, do we feel a little silly about talking about the playoff as much as we did, guys? I mean, that's my only take here is like, what if we'd enjoyed this season more? What if instead of spending the last 2 months talking about how it's an injustice and we need to get a petition going, like, what if we just said, hey, the cards are going to fall where they may and we'll figure it out? And I don't think that Beamer was distracted or anything. I think that he obviously put a lot of time, prepping for this game with the trick plays and stuff. But I think that optically, South Carolina, we want you, this is a year that the SEC has not looked great. And if you want to be taken seriously, this is your moment to shine. You could have had one of the most impressive SEC bowl victories, which is not saying much. It's similar to what I've said at times about Mizzou, where it's like, you guys want to be respected as this team. You keep trying to convince me you are. let's do it. Show up and do it. I want, I'm not going to loop you in here. Doesn't help me if Burt beats Shane Beamer, right? Especially with the way the SEC is. I know that, sometimes the controversy of the SEC going downhill can be, helpful to whatever, but I think that this is a team that was a really feel-good team. It was a team that we really enjoyed watching all year. And when you make the whole narrative of the conversation about how this team was robbed, instead of, oh my gosh, look at this beautiful season. Look at Rocket Sanders, how healthy he is. Look at Lenore Sellers, the progress he's made. Look at Dowell Lockins, who was supremely missed in this game. I look at what Beamer was right about all this stuff. But if the final take in the season is, you guys talked about the playoff all year, and the final image is your coach being held back by several get-back coaches as Burt looks at him and points and laugh. It's not good, man.
This could have been better.
That's it. And I love this team was so fun. This was the most fun South Carolina team to watch for sure since Spurrier. And there were a couple games that won the one team in 22, but on a week-to-week basis, this team played like a good team. Every week, they had a good close to the 22 season, but they had some stinkers in there. This team had one against Ole Miss, but so that's it. I think they had a great season. I don't want to get too caught up in the playoff stuff, but at the same time, let's talk about our goals here and let's be happy for the present. That's what you should be as a South Carolina fan.
Yeah, I agree. Good team that could have had a better moment to be able to close the season. Ole Miss, different direction. It's we'll get to it. Let's start with the positive first. Let's get the positive out of the way for Ole Miss, who just dominated Duke in every possible way in a game that probably 12 people were watching after the playoff game. You saw that when Ole Miss was right, it was one of the best teams in the country.
Mm-hmm.
You saw it on Thursday with how they dominated a lesser Duke team. Jackson Dart finished his career just all over the Ole Miss record books. Mm-hmm. He made a throw in this game coming back across his body about 50 yards downfield that was just ridiculous. It was one of the best throws you've seen all year. Lane had him out there late slinging it. Apparently, he was checking into pass plays when he wasn't supposed to. Whatever. Who cares? Ole Miss still playing its defensive starters well into the fourth quarter. I don't care about any of that. Let those starters play as long as they want to. Last time, many of them will do so in college. I don't care if it's considered running up the score. Ole Miss dominated Duke from start to finish. I will say Duke running that reverse pass on the kickoff return late in the game. That was actually pretty fun, pretty cool that they scored on that. I fully support doing random dumb stuff like that in bowl games. I
love random dumb stuff in general. You got some dumb stuff to do it.
Yeah. Middle of September, we can do dumb stuff. I don't care. I don't want to limit it to just bowl games. One other nice thing. Lane won 10 games for the third time in the last 4 seasons, doing so at Ole Miss. If we had said when he took that job that would be a realistic possibility in a 4-year stretch, we would have said, dang, that's really, really impressive. He developed Jackson Dart in ways that I didn't think were quite possible. And I think that staff deserves a lot of credit for the portal additions that they made, especially in the defensive side of the ball, how much they nailed those. I've said that ad nauseum. One last positive thing. The Juice Wells Shane Beamer trolling celebration where he did hold me back. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. I will say I would probably take Beamer's side in that disagreement. Okay. A+ for creativity. That's pretty creative celebration in the moment. I think even Beamer would be like, all right, you did your thing in that moment. I'll give him that. Okay. So I want to get all that out of the way. We got the positive out of the way.
Mm-hmm.
Can I cook for a second, Will?
Please.
The bad is that Lane Kiffin's been speaking like a loser for the last month, and I'm over it. He said during this game in the fourth quarter, and then afterwards in the post game, that Ole Miss wanted to make a statement against Duke because Duke went into overtime with SMU, and the ACC got 2 teams into the playoff. So according to Lane Kiffin, beating Duke by 1 billion points would make a statement. It didn't. It did not. I don't think anybody in that selection committee watched Ole Miss against Duke and thought, guys, did we make a mistake? I don't want to do the whole rant again about why I feel zero sympathy whatsoever for Ole Miss not making the playoff. And I totally disagree with their very, very biased opinions about why they got snubbed. I don't want to do that whole thing again. But Lane bringing up the transitive property is a pretty dumb thing to discuss here, even by those standards, all right? SMU went to overtime against Duke. So by beating Duke by more points, then Ole Miss would show that it was more deserving of a playoff spot than SMU. Okay, Indiana lost to Notre Dame by fewer points than Georgia did, and IU did that in South Bend. In Lane's world, did Indiana make a statement that it was more deserving than Georgia of being in the playoff? Or was Lane too busy tweeting through that game about how the selection committee messed up? Let's also remember that
Rooting
when
for Penn State, I think, was a little beyond the. Anyway.
Cheering for Penn State was very lame. Very lame. Let's also remember that when SMU went into overtime against Duke, you know what Duke had? Starting quarterback, Malik Murphy. You know who Duke didn't have against Ole Miss? Malik Murphy. Duke started third string quarterback with 33 career pass attempts. What are we doing? Lane is delusional if he thinks the selection committee believes that the ACC is just as good as the SEC. They didn't tell us that. They didn't say the ACC is just as good as the SEC. We got to treat these conferences equally. Duke had the same record as Ole Miss in the regular season, yet Duke was unranked, and Ole Miss just missed a playoff spot. SMU went 8-0 against the ACC, and still the selection committee nearly left that team out in favor of 3 SEC teams that went 5-3 in conference play. And I get it. You've got to sell it to your team. It's us against the world. You want to get that 10th win. You want to be able to prevent the alternative, which teams like South Carolina and Alabama, we've already discussed, they were unable to prevent that alternative. But good Lord, move on. Move on. Or better yet, go back in time, replay that Kentucky game with a different result instead of just crying about how unjust it is that you didn't get a chance to play for a national title as a 9-3 team with 3 losses to teams that were outside of the playoff. Lane, take your ball and go home. You're not helping yourself. This isn't the marketing thing. Oh, Lane's got a master plan. He's always got to be on social media. He's always finding ways to engage. You are not helping yourself. You sound like a child when you spend all offseason telling us about how you've grown. And you know what? Maybe you have grown as a person, all right? But I've seen 9-year-olds at summer sports camp that handle losing better than you do. Go play your hypothetical football game on College Football 25, get back to recruiting everyone in the portal, and then move on to 2025. I'm done with it.
Man, if you guys watch the YouTube there, I just muted myself because I realized how much I breathe whenever Connor's going into that. Okay, here's what's so funny about that. I'm not even, okay, I'm almost kind of on the other end of this because I just know who Lane Kiffin is. I'm not trying to be mean. I actually think this is really funny. I think that at the end of the day, you're right. Everything you just said is completely right. I agree with every single thing that you said. Remember, we talked about off air. Expectation is rooted in disappointment.
Fair.
At this point, I'm like, dude, if you're gonna be Mr. Hot Dog and be tweeting every day, okay, like at least you didn't. Hey, you did get the win. You did, and it's kind of ironic in that way. Because the whole question about Ole Miss was kind of like culture. You got all these transfers in, and they can't all get on one page against Kentucky and LSU, and they kind of like have. And again, like the other, no one's going to blame you for losing. So point being, I think that we have. Man, this is just such a funny place to be. I'm sorry. I almost don't even want to be mean to Lane because it's so entertaining. And again, I don't expect him to be that guy. I just don't anymore. I think that we saw who his team was. And so he's kind of in that Beamer tier of guys that are more about the headline than the, at this point, championship aspirations. I think that Beamer moved himself into Lane Kiffin's tier, and now we got to see who Beamer is. But I think Lane is just so firmly here. And we'll see it again. He beat Georgia. Like, it's just such a weird year for him. I don't know. I think that's kind of it when it comes to like the Lane stuff. I think that overall, you didn't really say anything about your culture here, but if you're going to talk that much smack, at least you back it up. So I'll give you credit there, man.
I'll give you credit for that. And your team, like I said, when it was right, it was really good. Mm-hmm. It was fun to watch. Your defense finally showed up and looked like you hoped it would throughout this season, and that's great. Mm-hmm. And I'm fully on board with Jackson Dart being a much better quarterback than I initially gave him credit for, and all these different things. Like, I get it. And I support most of what Lane does on social media because when you're the head coach at Ole Miss, it's different. You do have to do a bit of selling. I get all that. I'm just so sick of this because this is going to continue to be a problem in the 12-team playoff era if we have coaches that continue to think that it's just, oh my gosh, how could they ever disrespect us? And look, I don't like to do the bowl results they reflect how we should have felt in the regular season because of all the different moving pieces. The SEC hasn't helped itself. So your argument that, oh my God, you just have to give the SEC the benefit of the doubt in every single instance, the SEC is still getting the benefit of the doubt. In a lot of these instances, they are. what other teams with 9-3 records are being discussed? None.
True.
They are in that spot because they are 9-3. And we're talking about 11-1 compared to 9-3. All right, so like let's not pretend like, oh, you think that all these things are equal. You have to actually look at what the games are. I'm just so over it with Lane. Like I just hated the way that he tweeted. Like I already talked about before. That's the closest I've come to muting him in the past, and it's silly. And he can't actually believe all this stuff at this point. He sounds like a conspiracy theorist. Like he does.
Cotter, I agree with everything you said. I'm not disagreeing with you. I got there in one of the Saban games where I was like, this guy's just never going to get there. Whatever. I compared him to a certain figure who has become a lot more relevant in our political discourse, or at least I'm not even going to say his name, but I think he fully took that step over the last couple of weeks. But point being, it's funny to me at this point, and I can't believe I'm saying this. I truly can't, but there's the Bucky Perkins tweet that said, last 3 years, guys, or not 3 years, sorry, 22 is off, but 10-3, 11-2, 10-3. This is kind of the best stretch for Ole Miss since it is the best stretch for Ole Miss since integration, and I can't believe I'm giving them kind of a moral victory here, but the consistency, this is what you are. You are consistently about 10-win team. I've always I'm just like, hey, you guys. I don't see this team being disciplined for a 12-team playoff. You're going to need to win the SEC, which I don't think you can do to get a bye, because you don't. If you give Lane Kiffin 4 games in a row, he's going to blow one of them. So it is what it is. So it's funny to me. It's entertaining. I'm just done talking about him as a contender after this year, and that's that.
Let's move on. LSU. No Dave Aranda revenge game. Instead, it's a Garrett Nussmeier is one of the 5 best returning quarterbacks in the sport game. Just slinging it all over the place, even without Kyron Lacey. He was great. Baylor couldn't get pressure on him outside of when they dropped that edge guy into coverage, and Nuss just didn't read it.
I tell you what, that Nuss, man, he'll get one of those.
He'll get one of those like every game.
And
Kelly just
say what you will about Quinn Ewers and the arm punt. At least it's a punt. Nussmeier will go, hey, buddy, here's the ball at my 20.
Yeah, just did not see it at all. But yeah, I thought Chris Hilton Jr. He really capitalized on the opportunity without Lacey. I thought Trey Green capitalized on the opportunity without Mason Taylor.
Chris Hilton in meaningless games.
He's really good. He's really good.
he's AJ Green. Like this dude had 2 touchdowns in the Wisconsin game last year. This year he's getting interfered with. I'm like, if we had this gentleman, we might have beaten some other teams. Anyway.
Yeah, I thought the LSU defense pre-Whitweek's injury actually played pretty well against the Baylor offense that, as we talked about, was kind of humming coming into this with Sawyer Robertson. And then post-Whitweek's injury, not so great. LSU star gets carted off the field. He's going to have surgery on the fibula. He's fractured fibula. And he's apparently possible to return for the spring, which I did not expect with the scene that was with the team kind of surrounding him. His brother's super emotional. Kelly said afterwards a dislocated ankle, but ends up getting fibula surgery. I don't know how that worked. His leg got very messed up is what we know. And good that he's not going to be dealing with a 9-month injury or something like that, because that would have been how would you have treated that? Would you have traded a healthy Whitweeks if it meant losing that game, or Whitweeks being lost for 9 months and you win a bowl game?
I think certainly an all-time football God's move by me is Baylor's moving the ball kind of at the end of the half there. LSU has already gotten up to a couple score lead. And I say to the room full of people, I really wouldn't mind it if they score here. I hope this is still a competitive game, and of course they score, horrible injury, comeback is mounted. I'm like,
careful what you wish for.
Football gods. Why did I do that? Why did I think, I hope the other team keeps this competitive? That's on me. That's on me. Of course, I want a meaningless bowl game win. Of course, I want to ride off into the sunset, and just have a good time. So, but yeah, I think that it was heartbreaking, but overall, he has enough time. He's also a superhuman. A lot of people know his name. A lot more will know it next year if he's healthy.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how Blake Baker uses the emerging Whitweeks. I shouldn't say the emerged Whitweeks alongside Harold Perkins, who we found out is coming back for next year.
Oh, yeah.
And it'll be really interesting to see kind of the strategy of how LSU is going to use him and try and find a way to maximize that defensive ability. But LSU ends up getting to 9 wins. Brian Kelly is now 29-11. He is likely going to finish ranked for the 3rd consecutive year in the AP poll. Nussmeier back, as we said, those 2 defensive stars as well. Already been active in the portal with Nick Anderson, Barryon Brown, Bauer Sharp. LSU will start as a top 10 team next year, trying to make the CFP for the first time in 6 years. That's going to be the expectation. And it'll be kind of a no excuses season for LSU. And while I don't think it's, oh my God, if Brian Kelly only wins 9 games next year, he's getting fired. Some might come out and try and say that. I do think that it's the type of year where if you're coming in preseason top 10 and the wheels fall off, we're having very different conversations. But this is what LSU wanted to have, is to have those expectations going into next year, feeling like, all right, you actually have a real foundation that you can build on. And for Brian Kelly, your task is making sure that this isn't 2023 all over again when you had those expectations and you saw obviously that year come up short.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll keep it quick here. I think that, I was pretty, you can hold me accountable here. I was pretty aware of LSU not being very good this year.
You were all over that. I'm going to give you a lot of credit for that. You said it at even going into the A&M game when I said, Will, 12-team playoff, LSU, you're like, no, not there. This team was not there. And yes, I'll give you a tip of the cap, even though I've given you crap for making a few things about LSU.
Yeah, no, and I point being, I saw week 1 with John Emery being the leading rusher and thought to myself, where do we go from here? Probably not a national championship. And lose against USC, suddenly that's aging a little bit better anyway. So I think that overall I was pretty keyed on this LSU team not being very good. I think you're exactly like 2023 had expectations. LSU fell short. 2025 will have expectations. I think that this year, freeing myself of the playoff discussion very early, I was able to enjoy the Oklahoma game, the Vanderbilt game, the bowl game. I think that Brian Kelly did a lot of things to, get guys back in the boat as far as, you got Chris Hilton engaged, you got all of the portal guys coming in. So I think this is finally Brian Kelly has his team. He's got his guys. It's going to be really up to him.
Just don't execute anyone. Sorry, that's a joke from pre-LSU. A Brian Kelly joke.
Oh, yeah.
Just avoid. They don't have a Sunday opener to start next year, do they?
Well, that's also something that's really worth bringing up. They start with Clemson, so check back in.
Not on a Sunday, right?
Not on a Sunday. So, not on a neutral site at Clemson.
Yeah, but it's not on a Sunday, and that's all that matters.
Couldn't be worse than the things I've endured over the last couple of years. Good point. At least it'll be at a new location. I won't be there because I'm telling you, they've already gotten enough money out of me for these week 1 games.
Clemson's out there with like 3 defensive starters from the portal, and all of a sudden everybody's just going, buddy, Clemson's using the portal now. National championship hopes back on. LSU still can't win an opener.
I'll tell you what, somebody is getting canceled after that bowl. I don't know if it's going to be Dabo or if it's going to be Brian Kelly, but the jokes are going to be ruthless at whoever does not adjust for that. Anyway.
That's true. All right, Mizzou beats Iowa, rallies. We didn't want to spoil the ending on the last pod.
If you stuck with us this long, this is the Easter egg.
Oh, seriously. Look, we when we were recording, and we were recording during that game on Monday, we knew Mizzou's defense was just going to wake up, put the clamps on, just didn't have to say it. We didn't want to do that. And for everyone that's upset about the offsides penalty on 4th down that wasn't called, still don't feel like Iowa was scoring a touchdown, even if they did call that offsides against Mizzou. Didn't have a touchdown the entire second half. That Johnny Walker Jr. sack in the middle of the 3rd quarter that held Iowa to a field goal after it looked like they were about to make it a 14-point game, that was huge. The death row defense, as Brady Cook was talking about afterwards, they played really, really well. Also, Brady Cook basically just had Marquise Johnson available in the second half because your boy Weiss went down.
That boy Weiss.
Sad. Yeah. Cook basically did his I'm back from the hospital performance.
As easy as just turn into pro wrestling, huh?
We need when a guy is just all of a sudden he flips the switch.
Mm-hmm.
Do we call that a hospital game?
I feel like we've seen enough of them now. Got the Brady Cook one. We got Hugh Freeze hospital game. We can forget.
That's a literal hospital game, a hospital bed game. I'm talking like all of a sudden you realize this guy, I don't know what he did in that locker room, but he is a different player than who he is right now. Mm-hmm. And to be fair, Brady Cook was pretty much like this, I think, for at least a good chunk of the day against a respected Iowa defense. But he was tremendous on the stretch. He really was. And I came to really respect him. I did. And I know we got into the discussion about Brady Cook versus Drew Lock. I've since converted to the other side, but Brady Cook just ends up leaving a legacy as a winner. And to have consecutive 10-win seasons is no small feat. It's really not. We talked about how weird it was that Mizzou had a negative scoring differential in SEC play. Actually ended up being minus 20 in 10 games against core 4 teams this year. Mizzou might finish as a top 15 team this year, even though it got blown out by A&M and Bama. And the best win came against an Iowa team that was 8-5. Kind of doesn't matter in some ways, kind of matters in others. Drink quote tweeted someone that said Mizzou is going to go down as the worst 10-win team in history. And Drink said, just make sure you add Music City Bowl champs to it. Love it.
That's the old Jack Sparrow, but you have heard of me. It is a 10-win team. Who can't say that? Anyway.
21-5 in a 2-year stretch for Mizzou. Here's the other thing. I can criticize the lack of quality wins this year, but Mizzou's only losses in this 2-year stretch: 10-3 LSU with a Heisman Trophy winner, 13-1 Georgia in Athens, a game that they were competitive in.
And they were very competitive in both of those games, too.
Yeah. And then this year, an 8-win A&M team, the ugliest, definitely the ugliest of this group.
Not competitive in that game.
Not competitive whatsoever. The loss to a 9-win Bama team, albeit with a banged-up Brady Cook. Drew Pine has to come in. That game was just a disaster from the start. And then 9-win South Carolina in Williams-Brice, and it was a game that they lost in the final minute after they came back, and then they let the Lenora Sellers drive happen late, and Rocket Sanders ran over 15 guys like he was Billingsley in Friday Night Lights. But
go ahead.
That's impressive. That's impressive. It is. One last thing. Blake Craig, shout out to you. Hits a 51-yarder and a 56-yard kick in the fourth quarter. Hit 6 from 50 yards. Looking like Money Mevis. Just saying. Preseason All-SEC. Sign him up.
Look, that's your identity if you're Drake. You just got to find kickers that do legs. Anyway, yeah, I think that I don't want to read too deep into this to be the hopium thing, but I think a lot of these quarterbacks, outside of literally just Jalen Milroe, the kind of the old guard of the SEC for these bowl games did represent pretty well. I think that Brady Cook, Diego Pavia, Nuss is one of those guys. I think
Jackson Dart.
Jackson Dart, duh. That was the other guy I was thinking of.
Quinn Ewers.
A little bit, I think that that's more of like a playoff game, but in terms of like keeping the guys in the boat, keeping guys from transferring in these other games, I do think that a lot of them were able to ride off into the sunset, and at the end, it was looking pretty rough for them, obviously, and so the fact that that was the actual kind of Friday Night Light style send off for Cook, pretty cool. But yeah, like I said, just as Ole Miss, we talked about Ole Miss and Mizzou a lot last year, and I think their ability to set the floor after 2 really historic seasons, yeah, they quote unquote didn't live up to expectations. But they also didn't embarrass themselves in a way that fans look at yourself in the mirror. What's been more common? Has it been you guys, stepping on the rake, or has it been you guys having about par for the course season? And about par for the course season is really what you hope, honestly. After what you guys did, and you could build on that, you can recruit off of that, you can hit the portal. So I think overall, we did a lot to bemoan Mizzou, but like we said, be sure you put that 10 wins in there because
they earned
it's really
that.
hard.
They earned the right to be bemoaned.
Yeah, they sure did.
If they had come into this year picked to finish 11th in the SEC, we would be praising this 10-win season. But because of how good they were last year and what they returned on the offensive side, I think they were first in the SEC in percentage of returning production coming into this year. Then, yeah, you earn those expectations and you earn the right to have a 10-win season be called kind of disappointing and kind of hollow, as we did. But it still could have been so much worse. And Drink deserves credit for that. He absolutely does. Did not embarrass this team in ways that others did. Florida State. Just saying.
Yeah.
All right. Schedule for us. That's a pod, by the way. That was a loaded pod. We are going to record on Monday. We're going to preview the playoff. Our friend Chris Budden is going to join us. She's been everywhere lately. So it'd be good to catch up with her. We'll talk all things playoff as well. It's kind of put a bow on some of the SEC things that she saw throughout the season. And then I think we're going to wait until Sunday to record after that. We're planning on the fly here. This is what we're doing. Super strange to have Thursday, Friday playoff games. I don't know that it makes a ton of sense for us to be like, yeah, let's record a pod on a Saturday when people aren't quite as dialed in. So we might record that on a Sunday. We'll have to kind of figure out what the schedules will be looking like. But yeah, that'll be the plan. Record Monday of next week, and that pod will come out on Tuesday. If you haven't, leave us a 5-star review. Subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can watch every episode of the Saturday Down South podcast. Follow us on Twitter at the SDS Pod, at Sat Down South, at CJ O'Gara, at Chris Hart. Thanks, guys. Talk soon.